Good morning, afternoon, and evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us today, and I hope you're all doing well. I'm personally very excited to listen in on a topic that is very pertinent in today's context: employee engagement. Well, we hope to answer some of the questions every HR leader is seeking answers for. And that's all because in today's discussion, we've got lined up for you a very exciting panel that will bring together different perspectives on this very relevant issue. Now, what I'd love to do is to see who all are joining us today. Thank you, Lynn, for joining us from Malaysia, Chandru from India, Abdul Hadi from Saudi. Thank you. Please join us for this session, and we look forward to make this a super exciting and engaging one. Now, first, we're going to have an advisor's perspective from KPMG. And you can expect a very practical framework on shift to work from anywhere culture and how to think about employee engagement and manage productivity of employees. Then we'll share technology perspective from our Ramco expert on how leveraging technology can enable employee engagement for your employees, including your HR and payroll teams. Finally, we're going to hear a CHRO perspective on how an organization went about its HR transformation journey. So yes, we do have some pleasant surprises planned for you today. Well, without any further ado, let me hand over to our first speaker for today, David Oberson, and he will touch upon work from anywhere culture. I encourage everyone to drop in any questions you have for David in the chat, and we would be sure to answer them as soon as he finishes. Now, before David begins, I just want to spend a couple of minutes introducing him so you know where he comes from, right? David is the head of accounting and payroll services in Switzerland. Additionally, he is also the global leader for payroll services at KPMG and joins us with over 20 years of experience in the field of outsourcing services on an international and national level. His area of expertise includes harmonizing payroll processes, payroll IT infrastructure to ensure efficient flow of work and cost optimization, payroll review related to payroll compliance, payroll processes, and payroll IT infrastructure. He advises related to social regulations and withholding tax on a local and international level. Welcome, David, and we are very excited to hear more about this cultural shift where we're hearing more and more about work from anywhere culture. And thank you to a fantastic audience for joining us on time. You're going to be hearing now from David.
Thank you very much, Mansi. Good morning and good afternoon, everybody. So during the next few minutes, I'm going to drive you through work from anywhere culture. So what actually does it mean, work from anywhere today? So could you move to the next slide, please? So where do you work from today? Let's say before the pandemic, everybody was mainly working from the office. Then potentially you had some home office, or some employees were able to do some home office work. Now we see the trend of working from somewhere else. And what does it mean? It also means from totally different locations. So now let me walk you through, let's say, what is the employees requesting for more flexibility on the workplace. So could you move to the next slide, please? So here are the few examples. When you are asking employees what do they expect now from their employer, is they are expecting more flexibility on the workplace. But what really does it mean? So if you see, and if we, based on some research we have done, let's go through a few examples. So new hires, for instance, from abroad, who doesn't want to relocate, let's say in another country, wish to try to work from that country where he's currently resident. Employees are traveling all around the world, and what do they want to do is they want to work wherever they are from different places, but different countries as well. Let's say when you have an expatriate, for instance, who needs to relocate to another country, the spouse potentially wants to continue its or her business from this new country, but doing this business remotely. Many employees owns a second house where they want to spend more time, but it means that they also want to work in that foreign home, meaning like working in the different countries. There is also cross-border, depending the countries, that has discovered actually the beauty of not commuting and spending more time at home with the family. And also, let's say, employees who wanted to spend more time with parents, for instance, or children, and they want to take 2 weeks of holidays, but they want to, during those 2 weeks of holidays, working the entire week from, let's say, the countries of holidays. So we see many, many examples of what is the new expectation of employees regarding flexible workplace. Now, I'll suggest to, let's say, move to the next topic is what is, let's say, today's reality and what is, let's say, the expectation of tomorrow. What we see is like 80% of US employees will refuse in the future to have a new position where flexible work will not be offered to them. On the employer side, we see that 57% of employers do not have a home policy in place, and we will see afterwards how important it is to have a home policy in place for employer. Let's say the CEO of Unilever said working from 9 to 5 is dead, which I personally share because I think flexibility is really key on today's world. And digital nomad is a new trend, meaning most of employees could work from anywhere. And of course, digitalization is really a key point for employer to offer flexible work from anywhere. Now, let's see how your organization could respond to this new requirement or expectation from employees. Now, the first point is, will you go back to normal as it was before the pandemic? Or will you take a balanced approach, meaning maybe not working 100% from home office or working from anywhere, but finding the right balance between home office and let's say working in the office? Of course, it's required a transformation of your workforce, or let's say at the time being no decision so far, and you attend this session to find out more about that and get inspired about it. So now let's let's go through the main issues that employer could face related to work from anywhere. Let's say the main regulatory pitfalls. Could you move? Thank you. So let's say I really like that slide because on the top of it, you actually see the potential individual tax aspect. However, in the blue box, it could be all the employer, let's say, issues that may face when you have an employees working in another countries or other region for the employer. Let's say if you look at the left side, potentially if you have an employees working in another countries, depending the seniority level of that employees working outside of the country of work, it could create a risk of permanent establishment for that employer in the other country, with of course potentially additional impact, and one of them could be VAT or indirect tax. Of course, depending the number of days that employees is working abroad, it may create an obligation for the employer to pay withholding tax or payroll tax in the country where the employee is working, even for a short period of time, because the local regulation will apply. And depending the activities, or let's say the seniority level of that employee, it could potentially create a risk of transfer pricing for the company. Of course, as I said earlier, I've talked about payroll tax, but there is also social security coverage or potentially registration to consider. Now let's move to the left side, depending the activity. So depending the regulation or the countries where the employee is working, the employer could face some requirement regarding professional or regulatory license to work in that country. Of course, as that employee is, let's say, is working in different countries, immigration is also a topic that should be considered. And of course, the employer will be required to ensure that the appropriate immigration process has been done. Let's say if we go one step further, let's say depending the local employment law could potentially apply depending if the employees, let's say, have a second house in another country and then is often working in that country. Now the question, which employment law would apply? And of course, depending the regulation or depending the countries, the employer could be exposed of cross-border staff lease regulation. So as you see, there is many regulation on the employer side to consider. On the employee side, it's more, let's say, the individual tax, whether the employees will have an employee's obligation to pay tax in the countries where they are working. Now, as an employer, let's say we have seen, and as you see on the left side, there is some challenge as we have seen before. But let's quickly walk you through those challenges to summarize. The social security, there is potentially income tax or payroll tax. There is a risk of permanent establishment and transfer pricing. Employment law, which one should apply? Of course, as that employee is working in another country, there is data security and protection to ensure, as well as immigration, which are, let's say, the main challenge on the employer side. However, to find the right balance, it's also create opportunities for employer to be an employer of choice, for instance, but to also offer dual career of working in different location, to also extend and have the possibility to hire, let's say, talent from other countries to support your, let's say, business strategy or HR strategy. Also, it create also a more diversity in terms of employees and employer branding, and potentially create some cost saving opportunities for employer. And of course, it will, let's say, create less travel and reduce CO2. Of course, I would say one of the main issue will be clearly business transformation from an HR perspective, but also from an employer perspective. Now, how do you find the right balance between, let's say, home office and working from anywhere? Here are a few steps that you may consider. So the first one is to consult with the stakeholder and identify the risk. I would say in terms of stakeholders, let's say one of my recommendation is I would suggest to have someone from HR, from finance to have a look on the, let's say, cost point of view from a tax perspective, because as you have seen, there is many tax aspects as well as legal. At least to have those four um, let's say, services included. Of course, what is important is to identify the data, analyze them, and identify the risk from an employer perspective. The second step will be to define the company's position of between, let's say, traditional work, working 100% to the office, and working from anywhere. Of course, it's important that the steering group define the position and actually define the appropriate actions. Let's say the third option is really to drafting home office policy, but also is how, as an employer, will you monitor where employees are working? You need to make sure that you have the relevant process in place in order to know, as an employer, where are working my employees. Of course, and I would say the final question marks is what is the new employer obligation? Now, when you have, let's say, define, put in place all the relevant and define the position of the employer, define the relevant process, let's say we come to the fourth step, which is managed governance and compliance, meaning implementing workflow, having the right approval, and also the right management of the new employer obligation, because depending where employees are working, as an employer, you may have new employer obligation abroad. And of course, this is really important to monitor that and to have a clear view of where do you stand. Of course, working from anywhere requires the relevant technology and tool to reduce the employer risk. I came to the end of my presentation, so I'll thank you very much for your attention, and I will be happy to answer to any question that you may have. Thank you very much, and have a great day or great afternoon.
Thank you, David. Thank you for making this as an insightful session. I do think the audience was not able to see the slides and there was some challenge there. We're trying to fix that. I also encourage the audience to leverage our YouTube link that has been posted as a part of the chat, right? So if you're facing issues on LinkedIn Live, please leverage the YouTube link, and I think the PowerPoint should work better there. Sorry for the inconvenience. Well, thank you again, David. And honestly, I think this was very insightful in how work from anywhere has become a new expectation for employees today, right? Now, I do personally have a couple of questions coming to my mind, but I think we'll park that for later. What I would like to do is definitely take questions if there are any from the audience. And if not, then I would encourage audience to ask us any questions that they might have during the session, so we can bring them up and ask the speaker right away. Otherwise, no worries. If there are questions that come to your mind later, we are reserving the last 10 to 15 minutes for a panel discussion and a Q&A. So feel free to continue to post your questions. We'll try to direct them to the right speaker, or let us know if you would like us to ask a particular speaker that you might have in mind. So thank you. Well, now I'd like to welcome Marketa Simkova as she touches upon talent management and how organizations can manage performance and productivity in this new normal of work from anywhere, right? So thank you for joining us today, Marketa. For everyone, Marketa is the head of people and change advisory practice in Lower Gulf KPMG, and she comes with a wealth of experience in the area of talent management, HR transformation, and organization design. So exactly somebody who we want to hear from. She also has her backing from numerous projects in the UAE, Oman, Saudi Arabia, and the UK. And her sector expertise comprises particularly from retail, hospitality, energy and utilities, and the public sector. So if we have anyone joining in from these industries, you can have targeted questions for her as well. Marketa has led several human capital function transformations, resulting in becoming recognized as a strategic enabler, delivering sustainable organizational change and enhancing business performance. Thank you for joining us, Marketa, and we look forward to hearing more from you.
Thank you so much for the introduction, and good morning and good afternoon to you, depending on where you are based. And so what I will be focusing on today is how to drive employee engagement, how to drive employee productivity, and how to measure performance of employees in this new era of post-COVID. The reason why we selected this topic during our last webinar, this particular topic actually triggered a lot of questions. A lot of you were asking, how can we actually change the performance management system to make it more effective, in this new era of working. And to be honest, it was a hot topic even before COVID, right? So what you can see on the screen is kind of the dilemmas that companies had before COVID even started. So in the more traditional ways of performance management system, there were, of course, the ratings or ranking of employees. But then companies started experimenting with having no ratings. And for some companies which had quite good employee culture, having no ratings actually worked quite well. But we have also seen quite a few clients who tried it, but it didn't really work well for them. They found that the employees are not really getting the right feedback, that they are struggling to link the performance to rewards, and they went back to ratings. So kind of there was no clear answer, do we go with ratings or no? Another big topic was, do we have our mid-year review and our end-of-year review, or do we have continuous feedback? Again, quite a few companies kind of, did away with the mid-year and annual appraisal, and they went onto the system of continuous feedback. And then again, in some companies, especially where it was technology-enabled, where, for example, managers and even the other kind of people interacting with employees were able to provide instant feedback, for example, by messaging or other platforms, it worked quite well. But in some companies, they found that, okay, they wanted continuous feedback, but the line managers ended up giving no feedback at all. And then again, some companies went back to having the appraisal twice a year. Another big issue that was always there is, using the descriptive evidence and not having a single source of truth for performance data, where this was partly solved by the technology, where nowadays by incorporating the performance management system with other MIS systems within the organization, it's possible to have kind of one source of truth for the performance data and, having it more integrated. And then the last point is kind of probably the biggest debate of them all. Should we have forced distribution, or we also call it the bell curve, or should we do away with it? Again, it used to be kind of the more traditional way, fitting the employees. It was a way to prevent the positive tendency of everybody ending up with a good rating. So quite a few companies adopted that, including KPMG in Lower Gulf. And again, with mixed results, many companies liked it, but some companies then decided to go back to the bell curve because they really found it that, okay, if there's no bell curve, everybody ends up being excellent. So you see that already before COVID, there were quite a lot of dilemmas. And then our survey that we ran during COVID, it was actually the Q3 of last year. 86% of the chief HR officers in the UAE and 100% of the chief HR officers in Saudi said that they really need to rethink completely now how to measure productivity and manage performance in the new age. So if we can now move on to the next page, we will see some of the drivers of what triggered this need to completely rethink it. So first of all, many organizations had to change their org structure with COVID. Many companies had to downsize, but then there were some companies that actually, COVID meant it was positive for them. They grew quickly and they actually, upscaled. So again, it was impact on the org structure. And anytime you have change in the org structure, it means that there's impact on roles. You need to recalibrate roles. And when you do that, again, that impacts how you measure performance. So that was driver number one. Then driver number two, and that's perhaps one of the biggest ones, is the lack of face-to-face supervision. So in the past, really, the line manager would typically see the employees, they come to the office and they sit there in front of him or her. They can see what they are up to, are they late? Do they leave early or late? What are they doing? Are they browsing internet or are they actually working? But, now with the remote working, nobody really knows, nobody knows what time we start, what time we finish, and what we are up to. And so now it's really focused on what do we produce, what's the output. The third point was that also there's a need for a clearer and contextualized goals. So again, as the roles change, we need to really tweak the roles we really need to tweak the goals to make them more objective, more focused on the outcomes, and to be more contextualized to the new roles that we have. The fourth point is that the performance management system should also be involved in engaging the disengaged employees. And this is a phenomenon that we see more and more around, with companies reporting that they have staff with burnout or who are disengaged. And it's perhaps because, we have less social contact, we spend very long hours in front of the laptop, and many people really are starting to feel disengaged. And performance management should play a role in keeping people engaged. Then the next point is that there's also a challenge with adequate and frequent communication. So again, ideally, in a good performance management system, the line manager, but also other kind of people who come into interaction with an employee should frequently communicate, provide instant feedback if things are not going well. It shouldn't be left for the mid-year or end of year. But if there is no good quality communication and no frequent communication, this will be impacted. So that's something that perhaps, again, with the virtual working where we don't see someone, we might, forget, giving them a regular call or feedback. And it's something that we need to keep in mind. The next point is that we also need to create a more clear link and line of sight of the impact of work. And what we mean by this is that, typically when employees come, into the office or onto the site of the company, they can see what they produce and how it actually fits into the bigger picture, how it kind of contributes to the overall strategy of the organization. But with working remotely, not seeing other people, this clear sight of seeing how the work impacts the overall company might not be there. So again, it needs to be incorporated into the new performance management system. And the next point is having the balance between focusing on the objectives, so the measurable part, the what, but also the behavioral assessment, so the how, how it was achieved. And finally, also for quite a few companies, it was very important to keep the compensation control as a part of the overall cost control. And again, rethinking how the compensation, especially the variable one, can be used to drive performance. So these are some of the issues or some of the new phenomena that we have seen coming up in line with the virtual working and with the new reality. And then also what we have seen is that there's quite a lot of new types of roles. So we have these solid roles, which are typically very specialized, and the employee really focuses on what their role is and doesn't go much beyond the boundaries. But during these recent times, we have also seen the emergence of new liquid roles, and these are effectively a cluster of roles which have very similar skill sets. And as a result of that, the employees quite often double head or triple head. They don't fulfill just one role, but they can quite often be deployed on other roles as well, depending on the need. And of course, the fact that we have more and more of these liquid roles, again, calls for tweaks on performance management system. And then apart from that, of course, there's the, various models of working, hybrid, on-site, off-site, also the increased use of gig roles or gig workers. In the past, at least here in the UAE or in GCC, about 16% of the workers were gig workers. But now it's increasing, and it's estimated that within the next 2 years, it will reach 30% of the workforce will be actually gig workforce. So really this impacts, the companies quite a lot. So we can now move on to the next page. And I will show you how it actually impacts the performance management system. So what you can see on the screen, might be quite confusing, and we don't really have time to go to every single element, but let me explain you how it works. So what you can see on the left side of the screen is the various elements of the performance management system. For example, what is the objective of PMS? What are the goals? What type of feedback do we use? And then what you can see on the right side is how this differs, or how is it impacted by the fact if we have more liquid or solid roles in the organization, if our workforce is virtual or on-site, and also if we have gig workers or not. So if we take just a couple of examples. So for example, the objective of performance management system. So basically, if you look at it, there are two main objectives. It needs to drive the performance, but it also needs to drive the development of the employees. And if you put it on a scale, and if you, for example, look at the difference between liquid and solid roles, there needs to be a balance, right? The PMS really needs to drive both performance, but also development. But if you look at the difference between gig and on payroll, there's a big difference, because if you have a gig worker, all you care about is driving their performance. So the PMS needs to be geared towards that. On the other hand, if you have more of the people who are on your payroll, then your performance management system needs to be more tuned towards actually developing the employees as well, because they will stay in the organization for a while, and ultimately you want to long-term develop them. And like this, the principle goes on and on. We can pick one more. Let's say if we take the feedback type. So either you can have a linear feedback, which is just from one line manager, or you can have multi-rater, right? And now how does it differ? So if we look, for example, at the liquid and solid roles. For solid roles, typically because it's just one type of activity, the employee doesn't really change the roles, they focus on one thing, then it's more okay to have the linear feedback. On the other hand, if you have more of the liquid roles, which really kind of keep changing the activities, interact with many stakeholders, then you might want to go more onto the multi-rater feedback, because that particular person will be interacting with more points of contacts within the organization. So this is just to give you a flavor how all of these facts actually really impact deeply how you should fine-tune your performance management system. Now, if we move on to the next page, here we have some kind of features of the new performance management systems that are coming up. So the first one, and perhaps the most important, is that there should be more focus on an outcome-based scorecard for assessment. So as I said, it's no more about the efforts, it's no more about how long time you spend working. It's really about the outcome, what you produce, and the scorecard really needs to reflect that. Having said that, and that's the next point, we also need to focus on the effort-based scorecard, but for development. So if, for example, an employee takes really long time to produce something, it might mean that maybe they are not that proficient and that they might actually need development in that particular area. So that's what it should be used for. The third point is very important, again, because there's a less of a side of a view of what the employees are doing. We need to set targets at a milestone, but also year-end level. What this means is that the performance manager should really be checking much more often, and those are the milestones, perhaps at a monthly frequency or quarterly, what the employee is producing and how they are progressing towards their objectives. It shouldn't be just left to the end of the year. The next point, and I already mentioned, that now we are seeing much more incorporation of the multi-rater feedback. So it's no longer just the one performance manager, but many more stakeholders have the chance to actually comment on the performance and contribute to the rating. Next point, real-time dashboards. Of course, this is enabled by kind of technology, where at the click of a button, ideally, we have one source of truth of the performance data. Next point, the virtual cohorts. What we mean here is that if you have employees that are working off-site and employees who are working on-site, ideally you should group them for normalization in these virtual cohorts, because it's quite difficult to compare somebody working off-site with somebody who is actually coming to the office. Reverse feedback, again, we are seeing more and more of it, where employees are actually given the chance to provide feedback to the line manager as well. So it's not just one-way feedback from top to down, but also from down to up, to enable the company to continuously improve the process. Continuous check-ins that ties up with the regular milestones. So you don't just wait till the mid-year or end of year, but continuously kind of check how the employee is progressing on their goals and provide feedback. And finally, linking to the redefined rewards. So linking the variable pay to productivity scores, and also increasing the frequency of payouts to ensure higher engagement basis and also on all families and roles. So these are some of the real changes that we are seeing now our clients incorporating into their performance management systems to react to the new reality. And this brings me to the end of my topic, and I would be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Marketa. I think, thanks for sharing elaborate tips on talent management, right? And I think I really appreciate the exact sort of action items that people can take away from what you've been able to share. I think it'll be interesting to see what the audience has to ask you, and if there are any questions that are flowing in. Okay, so we've had Lynn Ghazali ask us, are there any key performance indicator and performance tracking still relevant with the new work from anywhere? I think there are a couple of other questions as well, so maybe we'll just quickly go through them. And I think they're sort of related to each other, so maybe you could answer all of them at the end. So Abdul Hadi asked us, look, does continuous feedback replaces mid or annual appraisal, in the times of today? So all these are great questions. Let's see if there's any other question. Okay, great. So we've had Sunil come in and he's sharing, look, how do we evaluate the performance at, the current circumstance? So I think they're all sort of linked to each other, and it'll be great to sort of hear your insights.
Mansi, do you want to go through it now, or do you want to leave it till the end?
Sure, maybe if you can answer a couple of them now, and then before we move on to the next session, and then of course if there's anything that we're not able to attend to now, we'll take them at the end as well.
Okay, perfect. So okay, let's start with the middle one. Does the continuous feedback replace mid-year and end-of-year review? So initially, quite a lot of companies that went onto the continuous feedback saw that yes, it actually does replace the mid and annual appraisal. But then the experience that they actually got was that, okay, they asked performance managers to give continuous feedback. And the good performance managers, good line managers actually did that, really then there and then they would provide feedback to their employees. But quite a few that were, not so strong or maybe not trained well in how to give feedback, neglected it. And then the employee ended up having to kind of no feedback at all, because there was kind of no monitoring. Nobody was monitoring, did the employee get any rating? What exactly is the feedback? It wasn't documented anywhere. And so many companies then actually said, well, it's good to have the continuous feedback, but actually we need the mid-year review and end-of-year review as well to have something more tangible and solid and have documented evidence of how the employee is actually performing and how they are progressing towards their objectives. So I would say probably the ideal scenario is to have both, not to replace, but incorporate the continuous feedback, because it's a great thing, to provide feedback continuously, but do still have some formal reviews as well.
Great. I think that makes a lot of sense, right? And I think you're right. The tendency would be with continuous feedback for some managers to be doing it really well, and for the others maybe not to be doing so well. Well, we'll take the rest of the questions later. I think next we have a session focused on HR and payroll automation. And I'd like to welcome Varun and Shankar to this virtual podium. Thank you both for joining us. So we have Varun joining us from KPMG, and he's a partner level and heads the managed services and outsourcing capabilities for Middle East. He also comes with over 20 years of experience in digital transformation and outsourcing of services, and has spent a large part of his career working on transformation and innovation agenda for some of the largest organizations in the world. So previously, he held digital transformation and managed services leadership roles with McKinsey and Company, Accenture, Genpact, IBM, and he was responsible for establishing and running niche capabilities like digital service operations, intelligent automation, analytics as a service, and business excellence. He's also created programs like Digital Factory to develop client capabilities and implement digital solutions. Varun has received top awards from his employers, and has patents in intelligent automation. Welcome, Varun, and thank you so much for joining us today. I'd just like to take another minute and introduce Shankar as well. Shankar joins us from Ramco, and he leads Ramco's HR and global payroll product strategy. He also comes with over 20 years of experience, and he's managed world-class HR and talent products at companies like Accenture, SAP, and a few startups. At Ramco, Shankar focuses specifically on payroll automation and uplifting employee experience through the use of AI and machine learning. So we're going to hear some interesting conversation on automation in HR and payroll, and we'll begin the session with Varun. Thank you, Varun.
Thank you, Mansi, and thank you everyone for joining this session. Yeah, we are living in difficult times. We are also living in an era where unpredictability is the new norm, where we don't know how the next few months are going to be across the world. And as we all, kind of look at our lives and our sort of work lives, we have over the last 12 to 16 months, we have been disrupted massively across different geographies. Um, this probably is a world which is not going to get back to the same normal that we have known for most parts of our careers and work lives. So, what is it that we as organizations can do to help our employees? You heard my colleagues Marketa and David talk about the need for driving change in the way we run the human resources and payroll functions, the need to reinvent. Now, a few sort of basic stats. 7 out of 10 HR execs believe that HR function needs to reinvent itself and transform. 4 out of 5 CEOs agree that HR function needs to reinvent and transform. So what does this tell us? This, I think, highlights the organization's commitments and the awareness that there is change that needs to be driven in order to enable our employees to work better, especially in this change. Now, work from home was a norm earlier, where people could partially spend a couple of days, perhaps in a month or a week, depending on the organization and the location and the nature of the job, working from home. Some organizations had embarked on that journey, but most organizations struggled when the pandemic hit us as to how do we enable the employees, how do we really create mechanisms to measure their performance, to have an outreach, to understand what's important. And the key levers that most organizations chose was to focus on 4 areas. One was culture. How do we create a culture that promotes collaboration in remote working environments? Earlier, it would be easier, you just get up and walk a little bit within the office, speak with someone, solve a problem. Very fluid, very effective. Today, you have to set up a meeting, set up a call, get on either a Teams call, Zoom call, whatever, and it has kind of increased the time it takes to get an answer. So how do we accelerate that? How do we kind of bring in the right tools and technologies to enable that kind of communication? The second part is reskilling of the organization, because a lot of roles are now getting redundant because of automation, because of newer technologies coming in. So to promote the sort of the organization's ability to transform itself, to pivot into a more digital organization, we need to enable our employees to become more digitally aware. The third is analytics. I mean, today we live in a day and age where data is the new currency. We've all heard about those, sort of cliches. Data is the new currency, data is the new oil, blah, blah, blah. But honestly, most organizations struggle to harness the power of data and to use it. So what kind of technologies can we bring in order to improve the productivity of resources, to understand the requirements of our talent, to have some sort of an analysis around their sentiments, and design the future of work. And the last part, which is certainly, it kind of anchors around all of these things, is the automation and digital technologies. Now, for small and medium-sized organizations, the world is very different. For a larger scale organization, which is, which has already heavily invested in digital tools and technologies, it is easier to embark on these journeys. For smaller organizations, if you look at, can they really go around creating the entire ecosystem for automation, for digital transformations across different lines of businesses, across different functions? It seems like a tall ask. It seems like a heavy capital expense. So what is it that organizations need to do? So organizations actually need to transform in a sort of a step-by-step manner. Today, if you look at it, a lot of organizations have invested into certain tools, maybe 5 years ago, 10 years ago, or a couple of years ago, but they are looking at sort of a status quo where standardized systems are largely everywhere. They have certain interface layers. They have HR working on standard processes, etc. But that has been the old HR or the old way of working. The next level of evolution for most of these organizations, and it is going to be a journey, so it's certainly not going to be a flip of a switch, which is to actually start applying automation, start applying tools like chatbots to answer employee queries, start applying mechanisms like language processing to get employee feedback and understand their sentiments. Look at how we can provide sort of on-demand services to our clients and our employees in the same way. Employees need to be engaged today even more than ever before because they are not able to get together in the same room. In most organizations, they are struggling to have people interact with each other. So how do we create some of those ecosystems that enable employee collaboration, that enable HR and employee collaboration, payroll and employee collaboration, so that it becomes easy for them to get answers, for them to find support where they need. And the last part, which is the most important, is how do we infuse artificial intelligence and machine learning in some of the normal HR practices and HR work that organizations have to do on a day in, day out basis. Marketer spoke about performance improvement being shifted into more like a performance achievement and continuous evaluation mechanism. What kind of tools and technologies can be used here? Now, there is absolutely no dearth of automation tools out there. There's absolutely no dearth of advanced HR tools out there. But most organizations struggle to operationalize these things. And hence, there is a need to leverage some sort of a, as a service partner who can help implement these things. Now, most organizations have small, teams focused on digital transformations, small teams focused on certain automations, etc. But in my, experience and the larger KPMG's surveys, we've realized that it's certainly not enough, especially when the need to accelerate is now. It's greater than ever. Leveraging a partner that can deliver these for you as a service actually helps reduce your functional costs from get-go. So you don't need to invest more into resources, but in engaging a partner who will deliver this for you. It will improve employee experience because the partner will bring in a combination of the right technology, the right skills, and the right processes that need to be enabled in your organization. It will also reduce manual errors and democratize data, open up the data, because a large part of data today in organization resides in manual papers, printouts, in forms, etc., etc. So how do we really, kind of use the latest and greatest in technologies to get this information, analyze this information, and deploy it back to improve the lives and the experience of our employees? Last but not the least, I'd like to, talk about some of the, tools that we have been leveraging to support, our employees, especially on the collaboration side. We've opened up, several tools internally where employees can interact with each other, where we run surveys to assess the employees' both physical and mental health well-being. Where do the employees need support? How are they feeling? We've looked at payroll automation. We leverage a lot of our partners to deliver payroll automation for our clients as well. And from an overall organization perspective, we've also provided these services to our clients. So the summary being that today HR plays an important role in allowing organizations to survive for future, to be ready for future. The organizations and the HR and the functions as we know it, historically, as we have known them, I think they have kind of become redundant to a certain extent. What we need to do is to become more digital, more aware, and leverage the ecosystem that exists or the ecosystem that our partners can bring in to drive the future of work. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Varun. This was very insightful. Over to you, Shankar. We'd love to hear sort of what automation can do in the world of payroll. Thank you. Thank you, Varun.
Absolutely, Mansi. And Varun, thank you. You gave a nice segue into what I wanted to talk today. So Varun talked about 4 different stages of how you could use technology to transform your HR and payroll services. Stage 4 was the use of intelligent agents and AI machine learning to deliver supreme service to your end users, that is your employees and your payroll team as well. Let me talk about a very realistic example, a very practical example of how AI could actually help you. And let's talk about 2 different parties here, the employees and your payroll help desk. You know, employees have a lot of questions on their pay slips, on their salary. And typically a payroll help desk is always overwhelmed with these kind of questions. They have to answer each and every question, every employee's question, in the utmost precise manner possible. So it's always a challenge of, how many questions how many queries they can handle after, let's say, a payroll has been processed. Now let's think about how we can give Starbucks kind of an experience to both these parties and give them some peace of mind during these tough times. So what do I mean by Starbucks kind of an experience? Can you move to the next slide, please? So if you have ever been to Starbucks, I'm pretty sure many of you would have been to Starbucks. The most unique thing about that experience is that how well the barista there understands you, understands your preferences about your coffee. What kind of coffee do you want? How much sugar do you want? What kind of milk would you want in your coffee, and so on and so forth. Starbucks is pretty popular for understanding the customers' preferences and being able to serve them consistently across any of the Starbucks, cafes across the world in a very similar manner. The more you go to Starbucks, the more they're going to actually understand you, and they're going to give you much more personalized service, right? So this is a specific branch of AI called cognitive engagement, where a company can actually use AI and machine learning to understand and collect data about its users, be it customers or employees, and then serve those users with very specific personalized service, right? Answer them, help them with their queries, or proactively alert them of, let's say, any specific event, and so on and so forth. Many of you might have experienced it in different places, and it might sound as if these are, let's say, something that big organizations like Starbucks, or let's say something like a Google and Facebook should actually attempt and try, but that's not the truth. Even an organization of, let's say, a size of anywhere between 1,000 to, let's say, upwards of 1,000 employees can actually use these kind of AI technologies to actually serve the employees. And today, when we're talking about a disrupted workforce, where people are working from different places, and your payroll help desk is also kind of split across multiple locations. They're not sitting in an office anymore to actually serve employees. This kind of technology can actually come in pretty handy. So let me talk about a very quick example here. So think about a concept called self-explaining payslip. Okay, what is a self-explaining payslip, right? Think about, let's say, you being able to send the payslip of an employee through a chatbot directly to his mobile phone, let's say, and that could be through any of the channels that the employee is using. Typically, most organizations have a collaboration channel like Microsoft Teams or one of those platforms. So you could, let's say, send the payslip to your employee, of course, on request through one of these channels. What about letting the employee interact with the payslip directly, and getting his queries answered right there, right? Let's say I see a new pay component in my payslip, or let's say I expected a higher value for my basic salary, but I see it's kind of less this time. Why is it so, right? So I could have all of these questions. Typically, a payroll, an employee would actually ask these questions to a payroll help desk, either through an email or through a ticketing system. He will have to wait for the SLA time period to get the payroll help desk come back with an answer. And the answer could be either ways. It could be satisfying, or it could not be satisfying. So the chain keeps growing, right? But all of this can be avoided if, let's say, I can talk to my payslip. I can actually interact with my payslip and get my queries answered by an intelligent agent which is sitting behind the payslip, right? So first thing is, it can understand me. It can actually provide answers that are relevant for me, right? So the answers are specific, much more specific than a payroll help desk guide, because it has not just information about my let's say pay information. It can have information about my leave, my time, my salary, and so on and so forth. So it can actually connect all of these data together and give me a very precise answer. The second thing is, unlike a human-based response, which is prone to errors, an agent could answer a payroll query one in a particular fashion, and next query in a different fashion. Here, it's an intelligent algorithm. It's an intelligent agent. It can actually, answer each of those queries consistently in a very precise manner, repeatedly, right? So, it doesn't take any fuel energy. It just answers it that way because it's AI, right? The third thing is, again, unlike a help desk which is available for a specific period of time, let's say it works only during the working days, it's maybe available from 9 to 5. An intelligent chatbot right on a mobile device, it's available anytime for me to actually query and get my answers immediately on time, which is, I think, a big deal again in today's time. And compared to some of the topics that David talked about at the beginning of the session, which is the pros and cons and the opportunities and challenges of, let's say, letting people work from home. You have got tax related considerations. This is much more simpler to adopt. Varun talked about partners who can actually help you adopt these kind of technologies much faster. So these are something that is readily available that you can actually consume and put to good use for your employees and for your payroll help desk.
Fantastic. Thank you, Shankar. Look, technology has a pivotal role to play, in the times of today. I think what we're going to do is, it looks like we're almost at the end of the session, and the most interesting person that I've personally been eagerly waiting to hear from is to hear a practitioner's perspective, right? We've all heard the experts from KPMG and Ramco. Nothing like hearing story of a CHRO share his perspective on employee engagement and the role technology has played in the overall HR preparedness and transformation. So please welcome Imran Ahmed from Jashanmal Group to share his story. And besides being a certified coach, Imran is a seasoned HR professional and a respected HR thought leader in the Middle East. In his various HR leadership roles within retail, automotive, FMCG organizations, Imran has led transformations across large organizations, building very HR-centric and people-centric organizations. He's also very known for his candid and practical insights, which I refer to as a practitioner's perspective. So welcome, Imran, and thank you so much for taking out the time to join us. We'd love to hear your story and your perspective.
Thank you. Good afternoon to everybody, and good afternoon to everybody who's listening in and tuned in. So it's very interesting conversations that I've been hearing, especially about performance management and technology integration. And from where, from my roles perspective, again, these resonate very, from a very interesting point of view. I recall February 2019, or basically all the way until November 2019, we were in the midst of a transformation. So as I work for a group which itself was going through a major transformation and leading into a restructuring, a lot of talent discussions, new technologies being brought in, etc. Around November 2019, we had just identified a new solution for our payroll, and we were going and implementing Ramco, and we were also in the midst of a lot of other projects. And February onwards, and by the first week of March, the conversation had taken a completely different note. There were caution, and we were looking at, should we slow down? Should we move in? Are we equipped enough to handle what's happening? So somewhere between February 20 and between October 20 of that year, we went through what I call 3 different phases. So very first was a, the response kind of a phase. Oh, what do we do? How do we handle? What do we respond to whom? What next? And then through resilience, fine, everything will be over. Let's get together, maintain the business continuity. And then we move to something called return. Okay, how do we come back to office? And all this process, through all these, we were managing 2 different conflicting, priorities or paradigms. We had cost management at one hand, which obviously was a very logical and kind of a priority weighing down on everyone, and especially on our function. And the second hand, we had all these emotions and making sure that people are able to work. They're guided. They're continuously enabled in order to do their job, and we are able to deliver whatever is required. We are able to meet our customer demands, etc. So between these 3 phases, what emerged was that obviously we had to manage all these things together through a technology enablement driven environment. Whether it's connect, whether it's communication, whatever it is, it was all centered and it was led based through technology. But again, very conflicting mix of managing this transformation with a lot of emotional issues that typically HR would handle. Now, currently, if you look at where we are sitting from, we are managing a lot of, as an HR professional, we are managing a lot of reflecting priorities. Now, organizations need between engagement and transformation. That's what currently I'm sort of looking at, and we are looking at managing the basically transformation of processes, automation on one hand, and then you have the challenge of making sure that your employees remain engaged, which is a very emotional expectations and management of emotional realities. Now, within all that, as a HR practitioner, one thing that comes out, and what I call a great reset that has emerged, is that while HR will be required to manage the necessity part of it, that means the transformation towards automation and technology, etc. This transformation will now need to be very firmly rooted in the good old HR skills. That means the good old people skills, where our ability as HR professionals to be able to communicate with people, remain connected with everybody, and to be able to bring that people skills to the organization. And I think that's what is the most important part as of now. While yes, definitely technology is a centerpiece. It requires every organization, I think, necessarily needs to transform towards that on that journey. But that journey has to be firmly rooted in the good old people skills, one-on-one people connect. And that's becoming an essential necessity for any HR professional to balance. Thank you.
Thank you, Imran. Thanks so much for sharing your story. And I think it's inspiring and something everyone's sort of able to relate to, right? I know we're at the tail end of our webinar and we're sort of already out of time. But what I have is some of our speakers are still available to extend for another 5 minutes, and we can try and take up some questions from the audience. Again, before we wrap up and take up questions, I want to thank everyone in our audience. Thank you for being a wonderful audience. Thank you for keeping this session, thanks for staying engaged, and thanks for all your questions. If we've not been able to answer some of your questions on chat, we will surely get back to you, and we'll try and address some of them right now. Thank you. So we'll try to take up some questions here. So Ashok asks a question straight for Varun. Hi, Varun. How does digitalizing payroll help SMBs? Or maybe we can even have Shankar answer that.
So I think that's Sure. Let me take a start at it, and Shankar, you can probably add on. So a lot of organizations spend a significant amount of time calculating payroll, calculating the number of hours, variables, etc. And digitalizing allows us to, eliminate the ambiguity and the delays that typical payroll cycle can take. Also, employees that are working remotely, in different organizations where taxation, is followed differently in different countries. That needs to be calculated. And most organizations end up using some software or the other, but a large part of it is manual. So again, answering employee queries and explanation of why a certain amount has been deducted or added. Those are some of the queries that can be answered through a chatbot, like in the example that Shankar described. So I'm gonna hand over to Shankar to add on to this point as well.
No, absolutely agree with you, Varun. I think payroll automation is even more important for an SMB than for a large organization. There's no score to it. For an SMB, you've got lesser stuff to manage. You have got your priority of running your business. Making sure that you turn on your business, month on month. When compared to that, you would want your payroll to be in safe hands. You don't want to get into, you want to ensure that your payroll stays compliant with, the tax and regulatory rules of the country. And at the same time, you would also want your employees to get the right payslip, right salary computed, and they also have the services to actually manage their payroll and tax pretty well. If you look at all of these things, then automation is the best thing that an SMB can actually do to again have the peace of mind for the enterprise, the people who are leading the business, as well as the employees working in that SMB.
Agreed. Can't agree more. Okay, so we'll try and take up a couple of more questions. We have Ashwin asking, Imran, would corporates be investing in L&D as the work dynamics are changing, or will it continue to take a backseat?
It's a very interesting question, and probably you are, again, when I answer it, I'll have a bit of a bias towards it. I have been a CLO along with the CHRO in my role, so I'm, like I said, a bit biased towards the power of L&D and how it can transform organizations. To answer your question here, what is the role of an L&D? That's the first thing that we need to define and understand. When organizations are going through these kind of transformation, what is essential is communicating to every employee. First is what is the purpose of his new role, and what are how the roles has changed and all those things. Well, yes, today we have technology, we have wonderful LMS platforms, etc. They take care of enablement part. They take care of providing what is the skill set that's available, or providing the content that's available. Now, in learning and development, there's another, or in any organization, there's another aspect that we need to take care of. That's the willingness part. That's the will. So you can provide all the content to an employee. If the will is not there, and will is a function of whether he understands the purpose or not. And for that, you need the L&D function. You need to make sure that through the proper L&D interventions, you address those. So to answer your question now, yes, I feel in such kind of organization, in flux and in transformation, L&D plays a very important and a transformative role. Secondly, not only from a learning point of view, L&D also plays an absolutely crucial role in maintaining the engagement and actually driving up the engagement in such environments.
Absolutely. I can't agree more. Well, let's see what's our next question. So we have Mohit asking, look, not every goal is easily measurable. And I agree. So how to tackle such areas, and what is the best way to provide feedback in some such situations? I think maybe we need Marketa, or Varun, if you want to take up this question, and even Imran for that matter. So any inputs there?
Well, if you want to hear a coach's perspective on it, again,
sure.
Like we said, there will always be different perspective.
Yes.
It will, in an organization or anywhere, you will always have these fluid goals, and it basically the question as well as the reality sort of boils down to one simple key factor, which is your leadership capability of whoever is in charge as a manager or whoever, and his, basically their emotional maturity. Now, do they have the capability to handle difficult situations? Do they have when I say they, it's those managers and then the supervisors, whoever, do have the capability to break down these situations into simple, understandable, statements or feedback, and then pass it on to your staff. It's as simple as that. But that capability and maturity needs to be cultivated. And if it's not there, then it becomes a difficulty. If it is there, then it becomes an easy, simple process.
I agree. Anything, any other speaker would like to add on?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you a very clear example of goal measurement. So today, the world is becoming more ambiguous. If you look at the objectives that we're trying to fulfill, we have to be agile. And it's not just the terminology of agile, but really to truly imbibing where we need to course correct, where we need to, improve on what we're doing, because the goals in a 12-month period can shift, from what we were targeting 12 months before to what we need to target, 3 months down the line. So continuous evaluation, continuous feedback, and continuous improvement allows us to course correct and allows our team to also course correct. So if we have conversations on a, sort of a more frequent basis, I think it allows the organization to navigate the ambiguities and the challenges a lot better. And also the employees to focus on what they need to do to improve. See, the fundamental belief that we all have is we're all, good people trying to do what is required as an organization for it to succeed, for us to succeed. And the only time where there is a misalignment is either where the skills don't match or the build doesn't match. Now, from a skill standpoint, we can develop skills, which is the L&D, component that Imran was talking about. But performance management has to be continuous. It has to be a coaching, like a sports, scenario. You don't evaluate a batsman only at the end of the year, right? Or a football player at the end of the year. You continuously evaluate the performance on each initiative. And that's, I think, the analogy that we need to follow. So how do we improve ourselves more as, on a performance basis rather than an end-year number basis?
I absolutely agree. And I think all employees are going to be much happier sort of hearing that and hearing feedback right around the time when they've sort of gone wrong somewhere, right? Because like when you meet at the end, it's unrelatable and there's that ambiguity, in the conversation and a little bit of a tension sometimes. So I absolutely agree. I think continuous feedback, would be fantastic. So let's see if we have any other questions. Okay. Can HR will be managed by AI robot in future as a work from home scenario? So maybe if I can ask Shankar to take that up.
Okay, so I don't know, I think it's Dwarak. I don't know what mood he was in when he asked this question. So let me answer it this way. Okay, I'll say yes. If you think of HR's job as, issuing payslips or managing leave or, managing the data of the employee, then I would say yes. AI can today, take over HR's job, right? So Imran was sharing a fantastic case about learning and development, right? So today AI can actually dish out learning recommendations based on skill gaps of an employee, as long as the AI algorithm has the data, about the employee as well as the repository of courses that you have in your organization. So AI can do a lot of different things. But it's still considered, in the AI world, what is called a narrow AI, right? It is tuned to do only that particular job, right? So if you think of HR as a custodian of the organization's culture and talent, as a constantly innovating and moving organization that dynamically changes with the flow of time, then I would say AI has a lot of things to catch up before it can really replace HR.
Sure. And anything, Imran? Okay.
It's always an interesting question.
Sure.
It's somehow, again, I feel somehow what happens is that when we talk about AI, a general understanding that's probably taken is that, you're talking about the artificial intelligence, which naturally somehow assumes that humans are becoming more stupid. So it's a perspective that emerges is about increase in the artificial intelligence and sort of to replace the natural stupidity of people, which is not the case. So when we hear a question like this in terms of will HR be replaced, so the question is, what is the definition of HR? So if it is today, if we look at the definition of HR as a pure transaction and processing of payroll, and somebody asks you a question, it should be replaced. It should have been replaced 20 years ago. But if you take and understand the definition of HR with the human in it, the role of HR in connecting with people, in transforming and touching their lives, in transforming the organization through genuinely, connecting employees and engaging the employees through the human touch, that role can never be replaced. That's why. So it depends on the organization and your own definition of what do you think HR is, and should it be replaced or not. I think it's a very, it's a very introspective kind of an answer that every organization needs to answer for itself.
Yeah, I agree. I think Imran is spot on. I love to give analogies, and the analogy that I'll give you here is the Iron Man analogy. Iron Man is Tony Stark and Jarvis together with a sort of an iron suit, right? So if you think of HR as Tony Stark, then you need to have AI as Jarvis, helping and enabling it to become more, sort of efficient, stronger, faster. And that's the way we need to look at it. It is never going to be AI without humans. It's never going to be automation without humans. We are just going to automate the non-value added or less value added activities and change the nature of work to more value added activities. So what would you want your HR function to do? To, keep punching numbers on an Excel sheet, or to really listen to you and solve your questions? That is the difference that we want to drive for the transactional activities to get automated and HR to do really meaningful, work, and release that time for HR to do that.
Absolutely. I can't agree more. I think, thank you all. Look, this has been super valuable. I think the last question was very interesting. And I think what we all need to remember is that HR stands for human resources. It starts with human and human interactions. I think any mundane task, repetitive task, anything that does not require an HR personnel to be strategic is what can be looked at, to be replaced by artificial intelligence. And that's exactly what systems today are hoping to achieve. And the whole goal is to enable HR professionals to be more strategic and to be more personal. So a fantastic wrap to an interesting conversation. Thank you all for joining in, and for a wonderful audience for extending and staying back in and telling us that you've thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. Thank you all, and until next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.